If you have your Bibles today, turn them to 1 Corinthians chapter 9. 1 Corinthians chapter 9 is where we are today. All right, so many of you have never really followed the Christian calendar in your lives. I get that. I understand that. It's not, if you grew up in churches of Christ, it's not something that you do, okay? But it can be a helpful tool for us to think about things. And we have been in the season of what the Christian calendar calls Epiphany, which is has to do with the wise men bringing gifts to Jesus. And so this sermon series that we've been in for several weeks now is about what are the gifts that we can bring to Jesus? How can we bring gifts of worship to Jesus? Now, obviously, there is the all-important coming to church and worshiping Jesus, okay? Very, very important. Don't want to ignore that. Don't want to downplay that. But there are lots of things that we do in this life that either worship Jesus or dishonor Jesus. And so we've been talking about these gifts that we can bring to the Lord as worship. And one of the things that I think we think less about in this arena, but I think it's pretty obvious when you mention it, is soul winning. Soul winning. Bringing someone else to Jesus. Bringing someone, it's almost literally like bringing a gift to Jesus. Saying, Jesus, I told this person about you. So, I like to mention movies, and Lee's here, so I've got to mention a movie. There is a movie that maybe like 5 of you have seen. It is objectively, it's one of the greatest movies ever made. Okay? There's no debate about it. The name of this movie is Napoleon Dynamite. Okay? Okay? Napoleon Dynamite is a great movie. I don't care what you say. I don't care what arguments you bring to the table. It is a great movie. And the main character, Napoleon, he's kind of a goober, kind of a goofball. Not kind of, he really is. Okay? But the whole movie is about his friendship with his friend Pedro and Deb. Okay? This girl that he's kind of interested in. The very end of the movie, it's one of the greatest endings to a movie ever. But at the very end of the movie, Napoleon says something to Deb, the girl. And it's so random and offbeat, and you wouldn't expect him to say it. Like, there's nothing that leads up to this in the movie. So the very end of the movie, they're playing tetherball. Do you remember tetherball, the sport tetherball? We were watching this the other night, and Kristen's like, I never played tetherball. And I'm like, what? Like, how did you grow up in America and not play tetherball? That was a big thing when I was growing up. But he says to her at the end of the movie, he says to her when she comes up to play tetherball with him, he says to her, I caught you a delicious bass. And that's it. That's all he says to her. Okay? There's no other dialogue, and then they start to play tetherball, and the movie ends. And that's the end of the movie. The last thing that he says to her is, I caught you a delicious bass. Okay, it's one of the weirdest endings to a movie ever made. And if you've never seen the movie, then that doesn't make sense to you. And it doesn't really make sense to you even if you have watched the movie. It's a very random ending. But when I think about that, Napoleon doesn't know how to express love to a girl. He's a goober, okay? It would be like, I don't know how I got married and had children, but he doesn't know what to say. I kind of relate to him. He doesn't know what to say to women, and he's trying to think, how could I impress this girl and make her want to play tetherball with me? And so he says to her, I caught you a delicious bass. Okay? And she just sort of stands there and is like, okay. But when I think about that phrase, I think about this issue. Obviously, we're not catching God a delicious bass. But what did Jesus call his disciples? What did he say? Follow me and I will make you what? Fishers of men. And the implication throughout the scriptures is that if we become disciples of Jesus, we too will be fishers of other men and women and bring them to Jesus. And so the idea of soul winning, I don't think we think about it as a gift of worship to God, but I think it is. It absolutely is a gift of worship. It is sharing the good news with someone so that they can be set free from the enemy and become a citizen of God's kingdom. And I think that is obviously an act of worship and love and trust toward King Jesus. Jesus, I'm going to do this thing, and it may put me out of my comfort zone. It may be something that was difficult. I may have risked a reputation. May have risked offending someone. I may have risked a friendship with someone so that I could bring someone to Jesus. And I'm going to do this for you, Lord. I think we absolutely should think about that as an act of worship. Paul, I think, teaches this point well in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 16 through 27. So that's where we're going to be today. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 16 through 27. Now, this is a larger teaching that Paul is doing to the Corinthian church to defend his apostleship. Okay? He has to defend whether or not he is allowed to tell them what to do. Some of the people there were questioning that. And so he's defending his apostleship. He is defending his authority as a speaker, as a writer on God's behalf. And then also he's talking to the Corinthians in this context about why he chose not to be paid as a minister there. Now, Paul stayed in Corinth for at least a year and a half. Okay? And that whole time he never asked to be paid. And I realize that, me standing up here saying this, you're like, well, preacher, when are you going to tell us not to pay you? Probably not going to happen, okay? But that's within the larger context. But I do think 1 Corinthians 9, 16 through 27 teaches us some great ways in which sharing the gospel is worship to God. Okay? Sharing the gospel is worship to God. So turn over to chapter 9, 1 Corinthians 9, and I want you to notice verses 16 through 18. Verses 16 through 18. And we're going to notice in this place that sharing the gospel is fulfilling a stewardship to God. Sharing the gospel is fulfilling a stewardship to God. What's a stewardship? That's not a word we use today. I'm a steward. We don't really talk like that anymore today. I guess we would call that Christianese. It's just sort of like it's just sort of a word that we use within Christianity. But what's a steward? It's someone who has been tasked. They've been given the task and they've been given management over this task, but they report to a higher power. Okay? So in effect, we all understand a stewardship, right? Like if you have a job and your boss says, hey, I need you to do this, you're effectively a steward of that thing. Okay, we understand this. We understand the concept. We just don't really use that word very much anymore. But sharing the gospel is fulfilling a stewardship to God. I want you to notice verses 16 through 18. He says, for if I preach the gospel, that gives me no ground for boasting, for necessity is laid upon me. Woe to me if I do not preach the gospel. Well, why, Paul? If I do this of my own will, I have a reward. But if not of my own will, I am still entrusted with a stewardship. What then is my reward? That in my preaching I may present the gospel free of charge, so as not to make use of my right in the gospel. So Paul is making the point. Paul is making the point that he wasn't doing evangelistic ministry for his own benefit or own glory. Okay? He wasn't doing evangelistic ministry for his own benefit or own glory. That's why he chose not to be paid. He had another job. He was a tent maker. He chose not to be paid because he didn't want to do it for his own benefit or his own glory. Now, in some places, he was paid. Philippi gave him money. Okay? So this wasn't the same thing in every place. But in Corinth, he chose to work another job as a tent maker and to not be paid because he didn't see ministry as for his own benefit. But rather, he saw himself, as the text says, I am still entrusted with the stewardship. He saw himself as a steward of something very important. He saw himself as a steward of something very important that the God of the universe entrusted to him. The God of the universe entrusted to him. Now, this is going to be silly, but I want you to think about this. I don't know, this may not work. This has been at work. We have such a polarizing world when it comes to celebrities and politicians and things like that. But I want you to imagine the last president that you actually liked, okay? Don't say it out loud. We don't need to do all that today, okay? All right, so I want you to imagine the last president that you actually like. Maybe it's the current one. Maybe it's the previous one. Maybe you have to go back 150 years. I don't know. Maybe you got to go back to Honest Abe. Who knows, okay? But I want you to imagine the last president that you actually liked, and I want you to imagine them traveling. Well, depending on the time period, they may fly. They may ride a horse. Maybe they'll ride a train, okay? But they travel all the way to your house, and they knock on your door, and they say, Brad. Can I use you, Brad? Brad, I need you to go on an important mission for me. I need you to do this very important job for me, and I'm putting you in charge of it, and I'm going to make sure that you are compensated for it, but you are in charge of this job. And I need you to accomplish it. My guess is if Brad really truly does respect this president, my guess is that Brad is going to say, sir, yes, sir, and he's going to get up and he's going to start on it right away because of the respect that he has for the person that's giving him stewardship over this task. And so when God calls on us to do some sort of ministry like evangelism, like sharing the gospel, and out of our respect and our love for Him, we say, yes, sir. Here I am. Send me. When we say that, we're effectively saying, God, I respect you, and I love you, and I will perform this task for you. I mean, think about it. If you've been entrusted with the care and advancement of something by a superior whom you love and respect, then following through as the faithful steward is the greatest way to show that you love and respect that person. And that's the way that Paul saw sharing the gospel. It was given to him as a stewardship. And if I'm reading my Bible correctly, this is a stewardship that's passed on to each disciple. This is a stewardship that's passed on to each disciple. And so, when we do something evangelistically, invite someone to church, pray with someone, say a good word about Jesus, or even just act in such a way that would open doors for future conversations about Jesus, I believe the Scriptures are teaching that we're offering up a gift of worship to God in doing so, because we're fulfilling that stewardship that God has given to us. We're fulfilling that stewardship that God is giving to us. But this isn't the only point that Paul makes. Number two, in verses 19 through 22, sharing the gospel is serving others. Sharing the gospel is serving others. I want you to notice verses 19 through 22. Paul says, "For though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I may win more of them. To the Jews I became as a Jew in order to win Jews. To those under the law I became as one under the law, though not being myself under the law, that I might win those under the law. To those outside the law I became as one outside the law, not being outside of the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I may win those outside the law. To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some." If you were here last week, and if you weren't, you can find the video on our YouTube channel, but if you were here last week, then you learned that serving and loving others is really serving and loving Christ. Remember what Jesus said in Matthew 25? Whoever does it to the least of these does it unto me. Okay? Serving and loving others is, in the name of Christ, is serving and loving Christ. And so, if we're serving others by sharing the gospel with them, then by necessity, we are loving Christ. We are worshiping Christ. I want you to think about this text for a minute. I know that we're talking about how this leads us to worship God, but I want you to think about this for a minute. The lengths that Paul was willing to go to become a chameleon in order to reach as many people as possible. And I think about us and the things that we're comfortable with, the things that we're uncomfortable with. How much of a chameleon are you willing to be to bring someone to the Lord? How much are you willing to change? What are you willing to do in order to bring someone to the Lord? Paul says that he was willing, to the Jews I became a Jew. To those outside the law of Moses, I became as one outside the law. To the weak, I became weak. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. I think this adds something to our worship of God. The lengths to which we are willing to go and catch a fish for Jesus. Catch someone for the Lord. I think it expands on our worship of God in that way. What would you be willing to do in order to bring people to the Lord? I'm not talking about, like going undercover or something like that, okay? I'm not talking about doing something that offends your conscience or something like that. But would we be willing to get outside of our comfort zone for the Lord? I think that's a question that's arisen from this text. Number three, verse 23, sharing the gospel creates a fellowship of enjoying God's blessings. Sharing the gospel creates a fellowship of enjoying God's blessings. Notice verse 23. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them in its blessing. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them in its blessing. Ultimately, sharing the gospel creates more people who receive God's blessings, which moves more people to worship and praise God. And then those people, what do? If we have the multiplying effect of sharing the gospel, what do those people who come to know the Lord through the gospel, what do? They go and they share the gospel with other people. And those people come to know the Lord and enjoy the blessings of the Lord. And then what do those people do? And so on and so forth. And that's the way that the church expanded in the first century and beyond to what it is today. And so sharing the gospel creates a fellowship of enjoying God's blessings. It just creates more and more people who are enjoying God's blessings, and people who enjoy God's blessings are doing what? They're worshiping God. They're worshiping God. They're praising the Lord for His blessings. Think about it like this. I know, you're going to laugh at me when I say this. Have you ever shared a movie? It's always movies. I guess that's just who I am. Have you ever shared a movie or a book that you really enjoyed with someone else just so that you can enjoy experiencing their enjoyment? Have you ever done that before? Okay. I do this all the time. I mean, look, all right, here's the deal. If you ever come over to my house to watch a movie, we have people that come over to our house to watch a movie. You know that there are rules, okay? There are rules. There is no half-hearted movie watching in the Kirby house. We don't look at our phones, okay? We don't fall asleep. We don't get up in the middle of a movie and go make popcorn and miss half the movie and then ask, well, what happened? Okay? No, we don't do that. Okay? If we need a bathroom break, we pause it and we go. We don't talk during the movie. All right, it's because we're going to enjoy this movie together and be able to experience it together and laugh at it together or cry at it together. You understand this concept. There's something that you really enjoyed. You want someone else to enjoy it too, because you get enjoyment out of their enjoyment. And then they can share it and let someone else enjoy it too. This is how the gospel spreads, y'all. I enjoy being a child of God. I enjoy my church family. Some of y'all get on my nerves. That's okay. That's okay. You can get on my nerves and we can still enjoy it, all right? I enjoy my church family. I enjoy seeing you guys and spending time with you and seeing you search the Scriptures and learn more and more about Jesus. I enjoy that, and I want other people to come and enjoy that too. And if you enjoy it, and you enjoy the blessings that God gives you, then you ought to want to share that with someone else as well. And all of this just leads, compounding and growing and multiplying to more and more people praising the Lord. More and more people praising the Lord. So, Paul concludes all of this teaching in chapter 9 with an illustration that serves as a call to action. He concludes with an illustration that serves as a call to action. Notice verses 24 through 27. Paul says, "Do you not know that in a race all runners run, but only one receives the prize? So run that you may obtain it. Every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. So I do not run aimlessly. I do not box as one beating the air, but I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified." And so I say to you today, each person here, receive the gospel. Okay? If you've never received the gospel, I want to urge you to do it. Okay? In the same way, and I would hope in a much more serious and vigorous way. If you've never seen a movie that I like, I would want you to go and see it because I think you would enjoy it. Okay? That's trivial. If you have never received the gospel, if you've never let the gospel message come deep down into your ears and sink down into your heart and make you want to cry out to the Lord for the Lord to save you, I say to you today, receive the gospel. And if you have received the gospel, share the gospel. And if you have received and are sharing the gospel, make sure that you stand in the gospel and do not walk away from it, so that you and others can receive the crown. And hopefully one day, cast it before the King in heaven. Hopefully one day, cast it before the King in heaven. I want you just quickly to listen to what John describes when he has a vision of heaven in God's presence. Whenever the living creatures give glory and honor, this is Revelation chapter 4. Whenever the living creatures give glory and honor and thanks to Him who is seated on the throne, who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before Him who is seated on the throne and worship Him who lives forever and ever, and they cast their crowns before the throne, saying, "Worthy are you, O our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they existed and were created." So it is my prayer today that you will run that race. That you will run that race. That you will go after the prize. That you will receive the gospel and share the gospel and stand in the gospel. so that one day you can receive that crown, and one day even more worship can happen. You can fall down before the throne of our God and cast your crown before Him, because He is so great and so powerful. And you owe it all to Him. I want to offer you this invitation this morning. Receive the gospel, share the gospel, stand in the gospel, and make sure that you're doing that. As an athlete trains for a race, I want us to make sure that we're doing this. Make sure that this is happening. I don't know what you need today. Maybe you need prayers. Maybe you are having trouble standing in the gospel. Maybe you are having trouble with the idea of sharing the gospel with someone. It's scary, it's hard, it's very, very difficult. Maybe you need the church to pray for you. Maybe you've never received the gospel. Maybe you're one of those that still needs to be caught for the Lord. I want to help you with that today. We could study with you. We can pray with you. We can do whatever needs to be done to help you out this morning. We have a tradition here. It's called an invitation song. Okay? If you grew up in Churches of Christ, you know what this is. This is one of our biggest traditions. Okay? Some churches don't do it like this. This is the way we do it. Okay? Lowell's going to get up here. He's going to sing a song, and this song serves as an invitation to you. If you need something, if you need prayers, if you need Bible study, if you need anything at all, you can come sit on one of these front pews up here and talk to us. If you don't want to make that walk up here, there's nothing in the Bible that says you got to walk in front of everybody. Okay? Maybe you just want to talk to someone privately. We can do that. There will be an elder in the back. You can talk to them. Or you could reach out to me privately. Here's the deal. God calls us to be fishers of men. God calls us to be fishers of men. But some of y'all, I don't know if we need to be fishing for you. When we need you to make your needs known to us so we can come and help you. Okay? And that's what this invitation is for. If you need something, don't hesitate. Don't hesitate. Come now as we stand and as we sing.